Welcome back to the second episode of the Neurospiritual Awakening with Dr. Val. And I have an awesome, amazing, incredible guest here with me today. And I'm just so excited that you're here. Please welcome Emily Knowles. Welcome to the show, Queen.
Thanks, Dr. Val. I'm so pleased to be here.
Well, look, you're the first guest on the podcast, so I'm uber super excited, but not just because of that, also because of who you are and, the way that you've made your way into my life. And it's just been really like an amazing, incredible time getting to know you. And I'm just thrilled to have you here. Do you want to just start by saying a little bit about yourself, anything you want to say, how this all got started, and then we'll get into, your topic of interest.
Perfect. Thanks, Val. I am so excited for this conversation because I think we have some shared views or some shared kind of perspectives around certain hot topics. And for me, kind of as a multidisciplinary practitioner myself, also lawyer turned psychologist for lawyers in my day job, and then kind of this big side part of my life, which is my spiritual practice, and that takes on lots of different forms, and it has done for a long time, and there are some enduring features, and there are always kind of new waves that I explore as well. So for me, yeah, really excited to delve into a mixture of science and spirituality together.
So good. Look, I was talking to this person recently in the States, and he called me a purple elephant. And I was like, what the hell is that? And basically, it's a person with a really niche skill set that, when recruiters, although I'm not in that world at all, but if recruiters are looking for you, when they find you, they're like, you're the purple elephant. And then I spoke to a friend who's in recruiting here in Australia, and she's like, oh, we call it the purple unicorn. So, I guess I'm just getting for myself. That's why we vibe because we're like the skill set is so niche and it's so beautiful, and it's also really required in this like day, age, and time in the world because of what's happening in the world. And I think we're really here to bridge the gap, awaken humanity, but not just the ones that are like practicing spirituality. I'm talking about all people. So that brings me, I guess, to ask you how did your neurospiritual awakening kind of begin, or, where is it at? Or, if you want to call it however you want to call it, you're so welcome to, but just a little bit on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like this idea of bridge work and creating bridges is really significant. Kind of in the world of science, it's between, science and practice, and in spirituality, I find personally it's often between the mind and the body. Kind of how do we create those pathways and those channels? And sometimes they're roads, and sometimes they're cobblestone paths, and sometimes they're highways. But for me, I guess kind of the awakening experience, well, even just to take it back a step, as a psychologist, and the way I view experience is quite specific also. So there's like my experiencing self, and then there's my psychologist self. And, sometimes I let them intertwine. Sometimes you don't have a choice, I think, as well. So for me, kind of there's this piece around, the teachings that I've had from a kind of spiritual perspective into my life. And then there's those kind of catalyst moments, or those turning point moments. So there's like the really stable kind of awakening that's been going for a long time. And then there's those really piercing moments, or piercing conversations, or kind of conversations or insights that happen that punctuate the journey as well. And so I guess for me, kind of thinking about the different awakenings as well, like the awakenings I've had in my mind around my pathway professionally and moving through the world as a social being, so relationships, and kind of how they've influenced and been influenced by my kind of position on the journey. And then also that my deep relationship with myself, and kind of getting to know myself, especially through one of my kind of enduring practices is yoga. And so learning about the subtle bodies. And so a lot of people kind of understand yoga to be movement based. And in the lineage that I'm trained in, which is called Ashtanga, there are 8 limbs of yoga. Movement, or the shapes, is one of them, so to speak. But there are lots of other aspects, or there are 7 other limbs. And so for me, kind of the subtle bodies and the subtleties have been really where my awakenings have occurred. And it's quite interesting because I always have felt rather sensitive, and I've had a whole kind of transformed relationship even with the idea of sensitivity as I've been maturing, growing up, and waking up as well. So happy to touch on kind of all these topics.
Yes, absolutely. Um, well, look, again, I'm just really, really like in awe of all your expertise and life experience and, what you've got to offer and the experience that you have, because I always like to say, you can't really have there's so many human beings out there, so many amazing lives lived. And it's just a privilege to get to know someone else's experience because it becomes a little bit yours because we're all connected in that way, even though I haven't lived your life, I'm just like hanging on to find out, how you live yours because you're incredible. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I was living your life. But in a way, through this kind of connectedness, I am, and it's just really cool. So, um, yeah, maybe just before I go on any further, is there, for all the listeners, these are the technicalities of recording a podcast during Mercury retrograde, but is there any background noise for you, Emily?
It's all
When
good
I'm
for
talking?
me. All good.
Okay, good. I'm getting a little bit of feedback, but we'll see how this sounds after we stop the recording, so no stress. All right. Okay, good. Well, look, I guess when did you start practicing yoga? Because obviously it's a big part of your life and it's brought you to, I know, to India, like your recent trip that we'll talk about in just a sec. But, where did you, like, what had you even delve into that realm? Because, we're talking law, psychology. These are very, very specific, areas of expertise, and not a lot of people from those areas delve into like yoga and spirituality. In my experience, I'm not generalizing, but I'm just like, my experience, it's quite a again a niche.
I guess kind of 2 ways to answer that. The first one is that I grew up in a household where one of my parents was from an ethnic background. And so I always lived with an element of duality in the family home, in the nuclear kind of family home. So I always had this experience of contrast around what it was like to do things with mum's family, what it was like to do things with dad's family. And I realized that I actually enjoyed kind of the interplay between those two as well. And so for me, there's a real aspect of starting to do the integration work quite early. And then once I started practicing at university level, for me, there was this real rigor that came with the law, but there was a hugely creative side of me and expressive side of me that I also wanted to nourish and harness. And I didn't do this at the time by design. It was more kind of, there was a gap, there was a yearning, and that was kind of how it came about. It wasn't kind of, oh, I better do yoga to kind of equal out my soul. It wasn't like that. But then when I did start practicing yoga, and I talk about yoga as probably the most long-term relationship in my life, because we've been together for 18 years. um it's really taken its own kind of pathway also. So like many, it started as a, not everyone, but like many, it started as a kind of stretching and relaxing and kind of alternate to hardcore physical activity. At the time I was running half marathons, so it was a nice counterbalance for my kind of somatic body to go through some softer physical experiences and release some muscular tension and also the fascial release. And it felt nice. And I didn't really think much more of it than this is a thing that feels nice to do. And then, after I think I got to about the 5 year mark with it, and I thought, yeah, okay, this is still kind of serving me. Let's get a bit exploratory. So I started trying different types of yoga. And then once I went through a few life changes as well, I realized that this had actually become one of my non-negotiables in terms of self-care and in terms of self-love, and also as a protective factor for my own mental health, that it was something that was very stable, grounded, and reliable that I could include in my kind of at times very stressful and very chaotic life to really bring me back down to earth, literally like to the ground. And so then, as the journey evolved again, I decided that it was time to kind of plunge into the actual philosophy and kind of understand what was going on with this magical physical practice that seemed to be morphing from just having physical effects. And so that led to the teacher training journey, and which has led me to all sorts of subsequent experiences, most recently landing in India.
Mm, how awesome. Okay, let me just hold on one second. Hold on one sec. Let me pause this thing and then we'll come back. Okay, we are back. So we're back. Um, Tell me about India.
Yeah, I mean, what a trip on lots of levels. I mean, in the 3D realm, in terms of what was actually happening geographically and kind of event wise over there. I spent some time at an ashram. I then was also on yoga retreat. So I got to visit a few different locations, stayed in a temple, stayed on a coastline, got to see parts of the country which were pretty incredible, exotic, intense, in all ways for all senses. So the 3D experience of India was, pretty mind blowing in and of itself, to be there and doing what I was doing in a dedicated way. I've had a real switch off from kind of mainstream life and got to really indulge in kind of the heart of my yoga practice and my mindfulness practice and the Buddhist teachings that inform the way I live as well. So it was a very immersive experience. Then, if I take it to more of our kind of subtle, I guess, kind of that 5D place of, what was actually going on for me from a spiritual universe, cosmology kind of level, it was pretty radical. I arrived at a festival called Shivaratri, which is the celebration in honor of the god Shiva. So that has a whole energy to it. So kind of anyone who knows their kind of Vedic kind of mythology and philosophy will understand kind of the cycles of creation and destruction. And so that was kind of what I moved into. So that was my arrival. While I was there, and while we were there, because I was in group, there were so many kind of numinous, like mystical, mythical experiences that happened in the temple, on the sacred grounds, the synchronicities in conversation. I mean, I think my third eye got a real massage, and not just from all the Shirodhara treatments and Ayurvedic treatments I was having, but there was a real kind of eye-opening in terms of intuition, in terms of synchronicities, in terms of clarity. Yeah, it was just a very transformative soul level experience. I went in also ready for this. I'd been preparing my body and mind through lifestyle factors, through habits, for quite a while also. So I was very primed to receive all the teachings, those that were kind of very kind of structured or kind of explicit, but also those that were more subtle, invisible, kind of the swirl and whirl of being in the cauldron, of being in a very sacred place like India. And so for me, the experience does not stop with the, returning to Melbourne in quotes, because I mean, this is the integration work now. This is the assimilation. This is, kind of where the actual rubber hits the road for what I want India to mean, what I kind of want at that point in my spiritual journey to mean. And so, yeah, it continues. And I think this is always the if anything's the hard part, it's returning to reality of day to day, because you get to experience different realities when you're on retreat or any sort of immersive experience. And so for me, yeah, there's this very kind of critical and potent period that happens whenever we take ourselves out of the lab and back into the lab of life. And so for me, yeah, I think as humans as well, we're meaning making machines. So it's kind of what I choose to make it. But for me, yeah, there's a deep reflective practice involved in this stage too.
I just love that. Thank you so much. And you touch upon one of the Heideggerian, I guess, philosophies of human beings being meaning making machines. And I know you're someone who's well versed and interested in that specific kind of branch of philosophy and as a psychologist. And that's another thing that I find absolutely fascinating and, wow, about you. Because, yeah, and it's another thing that connects us because I've done my delve into the ontological realm. So I'm very much well versed in that as well. And um, wow, India sounds really incredible. And now I feel like a part of me has been there through you. So that's really, 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 I'm grateful for it.
Can I add
Um,
something else, Val?
so would,
Sorry.
yeah,
I was just going to say, the other piece that I'd really love to share in the spirit of taking you there with me, is that I know we both have a deep interest in, human nature and the human condition. And I think to put oneself in a situation like that, and, I know lots of people have these experiences, but also not everyone gets to. So it's a huge kind of opportunity to be able to do that. But I really got to be exposed to the variety and the breadth of the human condition, not just on the outside world, what I saw kind of on the streets and, in the temples and everywhere in between, but also in myself. There was a very kind of deep turning inwards around my own nature and watching my own thoughts. And as a mindfulness practitioner, kind of noticing when my judging mind was really activated. And so for me, yeah, that kind of the human being with the big B, being kind of what it is to be part of the human race. And then also the small b, kind of the presence of actually showing up for the experience, were both pretty vital in my India experience.
wow, amazing. Well, look, again, thank you. And the thing that I want to talk about next is talk to me about this psycho-spiritual awakening, like, and the missing links and what, you've discovered for yourself within that, yeah, within your life, I guess, or whatever you want to say about that, because you're really the expert here. So why don't you tell us?
Thanks, Val. I mean, the fact that you kind of got the you bring the neuro side of things and I bring the psychology side of things, this spirituality equation, and psychospiritual being kind of a term that is something that really underpins the foundations of the way I work, in this way, being kind of where psychology and spirituality come together. So one of my mentors talks about psychology is one oar, and it's kind of like you're in a rowboat with one oar, and it helps you grow up. The other oar is waking up. And so this piece around growing up through psychology and waking up through spirituality, which I mean comes from lots of different frameworks, as you'd be aware as well. But these two oars being synchronized together, I think, is a really beautiful metaphor for and imagery for how, we can go on our journeys. And so for me, it's like the synchronization of psychology and spirituality. So what happens together when those two things are able to be harnessed? But there's also like another interaction of these two aspects. It's like the psychology in spirituality and the spirituality in psychology. So almost like a yin yang, like imagine kind of each one has an aspect of the other. And that again really came to life for me when I was in India, because there was a lot of spirituality kind of In the theme and mood of what was going on. But my mind kind of questioned, well, where's the psychology here? Where are the containers for safety? Where is the debriefing? Where are all those psychological mechanisms that we know kind of enhance and sustain an experience, especially when we're looking at kind of persisting effects and kind of wanting to make change at a human level. So the psychology kind of was, a bit of I wouldn't say it was missing, but it wasn't the headline. It wasn't kind of the main actor. So that was an instance for me where the psychology was kind of could have been or can be really layered on top of the spirituality to enhance the experience, and vice versa. If I look in a typical kind of therapeutic interaction or a coaching interaction, or something that is more typically psychological, if we don't go to kind of the spiritual aspect, which is in my kind of definition as a shorthand, the search for the sacred, the meaning making and kind of all of this scaffolding that we do kind of doesn't always hit the soul. It can be very mental and emotional. And so that's where, for me, kind of the spirituality enhances the psychological journey. So they go together, is what I'm trying to say. And so for me, I try to bring them together in the way I live, but in the way I practice, in the way I am intrapersonally with myself, the way I am interpersonally with others, and the way I am with the world. And so, yeah, for me, there's a real mindset around psychospiritual.
Hmm. It's so great, and I'm on the same page, as in there's lots of spiritual practices in the first episode. If you haven't listened to it, I share about my experience of, the one of my experiences in this awakening process, like having done the ayahuasca journey, as a PhD student, kind of doing it, not knowing. But I'm just thinking, and now obviously hearing a lot of the negative aspects of that kind of plant medicine being taken advantage of, and like the indigenous communities that are suffering for it, and also the people suffering as a result of it. So there's like a real missing between the education, as you say, the psychospiritual, the neurospiritual aspect of those practices. And it's like, in my view, it really needs to get filled. So we need to continue talking about it, so so that people are undergoing their awakening process, however that is, through whatever means, but in a way that is safe, in a way where it really forwards their evolution, yeah, I think that's what I want to say, in a way that really forwards their evolution rather than, fucks them up, for the lack of a better expression.
And for me, there's like the kind of the linchpin of all this is often mindfulness. It's the aspect of, how can we keep a level of our senses, kind of in terms of not just our five senses, which we're all very familiar with, but like our interoception, like what's actually going on inside of us as well. And I mean that kind of, I often talk about, and I know you love numbers. I often talk about like the magic eight that appears in a lot of different kind of spiritual architectures. And, when we can talk about interoception as well, we know that has a number of qualities. So like that's around noticing and like the non-distracting of what's going on inside of your body, and a few other qualities. And so for me, that is, yeah, like that piece around how connected can we be to our bodies, and so many things like plant-based medicine and other activities or interventions are often aiming to kind of hook back up our mind and body, because so much of our Western living and modern society life is unhooking them. I often joke that, and I mean, it's quite ironic even now we're doing this, but we're in a virtual recording space, and we see each other almost just as heads. Like we actually do have bodies though, and these bodies are important to us. And so I think COVID sometimes minimized us all to these Brady Bunch screens, where we were all just floating heads. And I think it's quite convenient in a modern age to forget that we have a pretty special body that takes us all the way through, literally. It's the thing that keeps us alive. And so to be kind of integrated with ourselves, with all kind of our systems of digestion, of our nervous system, of our muscular and skeletal. Like often we only realize something's wrong when there's pain. Like, it's like you go to the doctor when something hurts, and same with psychology. A lot of people only reach out, when something goes wrong. There's so many, if you're awake to it, there's so many subtle signs along the way that you could be listening to if you wanted to, if you could tune in a little bit, deeper. And it allows you to kind of not have to go to the end of the suffering journey in order to make a change.
Hmm. Wow, I love all that. And of course, I love the reference to number eight. As you know, I'm obsessed with numerology, and eight in numerology is the number of abundance. So I just love that you brought it up. And I love that, your self-expression is a three, which is all about being creative, speaking your truth. And this is exactly what's happening. So what a treat. What a treat. Before I let you go, I'd like to know for myself and also share it with the listeners, what is your like favorite mindfulness practice, really? Just so what does Emily Knowles get into when she's practicing mindfulness? Or where do you go? Which one is it?
I mean, I always start with the breath. And for me, it's also like not a controlled piece. It's actually just sitting with myself in silence, noticing my breath. That's where it begins. And then you can start to play with your breath, and you can start to, alter patterns. My favorite breath practice at the moment is a Viloma breath, which is a three-part inhale. So it's an inhale to your belly, to your chest, and to your heart, a hold, and then an exhale. There are so many versions of breath practice, but for me, it all starts with the breath. And so from there, that's like the entry point. And then sometimes I'll be called to move, and sometimes I'll be called to stay in stillness. And so I really don't kind of have too many rules around it other than the regularity and frequency that it needs to be daily. I need to sit with myself daily. 99% of the time, that's a morning practice, because I think the mornings are a really kind of open and kind of sacred time for you to be with yourself and to have sovereignty of your own mind before kind of the rat race begins and before we take a step out onto the footpath. So it's like, how can you be with yourself for yourself before your day's even begun? And so for me, it always starts with the breath.
So valuable. Thank you so much for, letting us in on that. And I'm sure the listeners will want to take a page out of your book. I certainly do. Again, I'm just amazed by who you are, what you do, everything that you bring. And, on that note, I'd like to very, very, very thank you. Very thank you. That's not even a word, but I'm creating it. I'm just so grateful that you've been here with us. And I can't wait to have you back to just keep exploring, because, there's just so much. There's just so much. Again, thanks for being the first guest on the Neurospiritual Awakening podcast. Thanks for jamming with me this morning. I can't wait to get this baby out so that, the world can hear us and can hear you. And also, please let us know how we can find you, whether there's a website or if people really do want to connect. I know you're busy, but if they do, how can they?
Yeah, well, firstly, also just thanks for having these conversations, or having a space for these conversations, and people like the purple elephants or the purple unicorns, kind of giving them a voice. I think we on behalf of all of us, we thank you. In terms of conversations, there's lots of different conversations I can have with people, from kind of formal to informal, from therapeutic to coaching. Also just to kind of explore some of these, pretty cool terms and cool new ways of being. Well, they're not new ways, but they're new takes in a modern age, I guess, of how we can bring the ancient teachings forward. I have a website. It's super simple, emilyknowles.com.au. You can kind of book an appointment or a call or a conversation with me there. But yeah, really happy to keep it going and flowing, because I think the more we can talk about these things, the more we can introduce a literacy and a way of even kind of expressing and articulating these big core human themes.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I'll put your website down in the show notes, and until we meet again.
Thanks, Dr. Val.